My mother charged me rent, then gave my room to my sister and her kids without asking. When I objected, she called me selfish. I moved out without making noise, took everything I paid for, and once my financial support stopped, the household quickly fell apart. Hey, Reddit, I thought staying at home was a practical choice while I'd focused on building my career and saving money. Instead, I ended up supporting decisions that weren't mine. When clear boundaries were ignored, I chose to leave, and that's when the real consequences showed up. I'll explain how it unfolded. My name is Negan. I'm in my late 20s, working remotely in a technical field that pays well if you stay disciplined. I didn't move back home because I had no options. I did it intentionally. Financially, it made sense. It allowed me to put serious time into my work without wasting money on rent for a place I barely used. Living at home wasn't some fallback situation. It was an arrangement. I paid rent at the beginning of every month, covered the internet bill, split utilities, and often bought groceries without tracking who used what. No one was supporting me. If anything, my contribution helped keep the house running. I didn't brag about it or expect recognition. I handled my responsibilities and stayed out of the way. My job isn't something you casually do from a couch. I need quiet and a proper setup. My room wasn't just where I slept. It was my workspace. Desk, monitors, hardware, cables neatly routed, everything organized and functional. I built it over several years and kept it efficient. When the door was closed, I was working. That was always clear. The house belonged to my mother, Joyce, and she liked reminding people of that when it benefited her. She leads with emotion more than logic. She doesn't raise her voice often, but she controls the atmosphere. When she's stressed, everyone feels it. When she's calm, things run smoothly. Financially, though, she depended on me more than she liked to admit. Bills didn't pay themselves, and she never refused my help. We got along because I didn't challenge her. I paid my share, kept things quiet, and didn't question her authority. That was the unspoken deal. I didn't need control. I just needed my space respected. Outside the house, I had one person who was completely honest with me. My Uncle Graham. He's older, worked his entire life, and doesn't soften his opinions. We met for coffee every few weeks. He understood my situation and didn't judge it, but he warned me more than once. He said paying bills in a house you don't control always leads to problems. His exact point was that once people get used to your money, they stop respecting your boundaries. I listened, but I didn't think my own family would let it go that far. At the time, things were stable. There was no obvious reason to disrupt anything. That changed when Joyce sat me down one evening and casually told me my older sister, Zoe, was moving back in. She had 2 kids, and her relationship had ended again. Joyce framed it as temporary, just a few weeks, maybe a month, until Zoe figured things out. I didn't argue right away. Zoe is my sister. I'm not indifferent to people going through a hard time. I asked reasonable questions. How long she'd stay, where they'd sleep, and what the plan was. Joyce brushed most of it aside, saying we'd figure it out and that family helps family. She also claimed it wouldn't really affect me. Joyce has always treated my job like it's optional. Because I work from home, she never fully respected it as real work. She'd also grown comfortable assuming I wasn't going anywhere. I paid rent, kept quiet, and covered expenses. In her mind, that meant I'd adjust to whatever changed. That's when I stopped and took note. Zoe and I aren't close. She's loud, reactive, and used to getting her way. Growing up, Joyce constantly covered for her. If Zoe needed something, it happened. If she caused problems, someone else fixed them. I learned early that pushing back only created stress. So when Joyce said Zoe was moving in, I didn't say no, but I did pay attention. I knew how this could go if boundaries weren't clear. I told Joyce one thing very directly. My room stays mine, and my work setup doesn't get touched. I wasn't asking, I was setting terms. Joyce nodded and said she understood, then added that I was worrying too much. That phrase was her way of ending discussions without actually agreeing. She wasn't thinking about what would happen if I left. She assumed I'd settle down like I always did. I didn't fully trust it, but I let it go while mentally setting my own limits. Zoe arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with almost no notice, just a text saying they were on the way. 2 cars pulled up, packed with bags, bins, and loose items. It didn't look temporary. She didn't come in like a guest. She came in like she was moving back permanently. She looked exhausted and irritated before even stepping inside. No greeting, just complaints about the drive and how hard things had been. Joyce immediately shifted into comfort mode, helping with bags and reassuring her. The kids ran through the house without direction. Leo was loud and energetic. Noah followed him, grabbing whatever he could. Shoes stayed on, bags were dropped, and the house quickly felt chaotic. I stayed out of it at first. I went to my room and closed the door. That was my way of letting them settle without interference. It lasted about an hour. I heard footsteps upstairs repeatedly, kids running down the hallway and slamming doors. When I checked, they were going in and out of rooms like it was a game. No one corrected them. Later, in the kitchen, Zoe joked about my job, asking what I did as if she hadn't been told before. She laughed about me working on computers all day and implied it wasn't real work. Joyce laughed along. I let it go once. That night, Leo asked about my room, why the door was locked, and what was inside. Zoe joked that I was hiding something fun. I shut that down immediately. I calmly explained that my room was a workspace, the equipment wasn't toys, and the kids weren't allowed in there. Joyce nodded. Zoe rolled her eyes and said okay, clearly not meaning it. Over the next few days, the house got louder. Zoe stayed up late with the TV volume high. The kids were up early and ran freely. Food disappeared quickly, including groceries I bought. Joyce reframed everything, saying everyone needed to adjust and that family helps family. Zoe continued making comments about my work and my space. Joyce never corrected her. I repeated my boundary one more time, clearly and calmly. My room stays off limits. My equipment doesn't get touched. Zoe agreed verbally. That same evening, I stopped Leo halfway up the stairs toward my room. He looked genuinely confused, like he'd already been told it was allowed. Zoe didn't support me. She dismissed it as curiosity. That's when it became clear my boundaries weren't being respected. A few days later, my Aunt Renee visited. After 10 minutes, she pulled me aside and warned me not to assume people would respect space just because they should. Soon after, I noticed small signs. My door unlocked, my chair moved, a drawer left open. Nothing missing, but enough to show someone had been inside. When I asked, Joyce denied knowing anything. Zoe laughed it off. I started locking my door every time I left. One afternoon, I came home and found it unlocked again. When I opened it, my room had been turned into a playroom. My desk was moved, cables pulled, monitors unplugged. The kids were inside, completely comfortable. When I questioned it, Joyce told me to calm down and said I was upsetting the kids. Zoe said they needed space and that my room made sense. When I explained I paid rent and worked there, Joyce cut me off and said it was her house and her decision. She said I was inflexible and selfish. When I asked how long this would last, there was no answer. Zoe said I wouldn't understand because I didn't have kids. Joyce said I could grab what I needed but shouldn't come in and out. Zoe said it was their room now. That's when it fully clicked. This wasn't temporary. It wasn't a discussion. The decision had already been made. I told them that if anything broke, I expected it replaced. Zoe rolled her eyes and said the kids weren't destructive. And that was the moment I stopped contributing and started planning my exit. Joyce said I was assuming the worst and acting like everyone was against me. I didn't keep arguing. There was nothing left to debate. They had already reframed the situation so that I was the issue. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. I didn't announce anything or ask for approval. I went upstairs and started removing what mattered. My laptop, external drives, audio gear, and hardware I couldn't easily replace. I packed carefully and carried everything to my car in small trips. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. The next morning, Joyce noticed the desk was mostly empty. The monitors were gone. The hardware was gone. She asked where my equipment went. I told her I had moved my work setup for the time being. She didn't like it, but she didn't push back. Later that day, she told me I shouldn't be going into the room unless I needed something specific. She said it was better for everyone if I stayed out of the way. Zoe agreed and said I needed to accept that things were different now. I nodded and said nothing. That night, I locked my car with my equipment inside and slept in the guest room, knowing something essential had shifted. Not the room itself, but the entire situation. That was the point where I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped believing my contribution carried weight. I was still paying for the room. I just wasn't allowed to use it. Once my setup was gone, my work performance dropped quickly. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't one bad day. It was constant. Every attempt to work turned into a struggle with the environment. I tried using the kitchen table first, thinking I could manage a few hours at a time. That lasted maybe 20 minutes. The kids moved in and out, non-stop, running through the space, climbing on chairs, leaning over my shoulder, asking questions, grabbing my laptop like it was a toy. Zoe never corrected them. Joyce brushed it off, saying they were just curious. I tried working in the living room late at night, assuming it would be quieter after the kids went to bed. It wasn't. Zoe stayed up watching shows at full volume. She didn't ask if it bothered me and didn't lower it when I was on calls. Headphones helped a little, but not enough. Laughter, shouting, and sudden noise still cut through. Calls were interrupted. I had to apologize and reschedule meetings. Deadlines slipped, not because I wasn't working, but because I couldn't finish anything properly. I wasn't falling behind due to lack of effort. I was falling behind because I didn't have a space to work. I brought it up calmly more than once. I didn't slam doors or make accusations. I laid out practical options that didn't hurt anyone. The guest room could work with some changes. The kids could rotate rooms temporarily. I could move my desk somewhere else if I had a door to close. I wasn't demanding everything return to normal overnight. I just needed a workable setup to do my job. Joyce shut down every suggestion without considering them. She didn't ask questions or weigh alternatives. She said the guest room was too small. She said rotation would confuse the kids. She said I was complicating things and stressing everyone out. Zoe didn't pretend to consider anything. She laughed and said I should be able to handle a little inconvenience. She said people with real responsibilities don't complain about comfort. Each time she spoke, it felt less like stress and more like entitlement, like she'd already decided my issues didn't matter. Then she got louder. She said I wasn't stepping up. She said family makes sacrifices, and I clearly didn't understand that. She said I was lucky not to have kids depending on me and didn't know what real pressure was. She talked like hardship was a competition and she'd already won. Joyce nodded along, repeating that Zoe needed support and that I was in a better position to adapt. She said I was young, flexible, and would be fine. Everything came back to the same point. I could handle it, so I should. At the same time, Joyce started asking for money more often. Not rent, extra money. For groceries, utilities, and random expenses. It wasn't framed as help. It was treated as expected, like my contribution was automatic, and questioning it was unreasonable. Zoe never offered anything. She didn't discuss contributing. She didn't ask about costs. She didn't suggest helping. She acted like it was already covered. The house grew louder. Zoe invited people over without saying anything. Friends, kids, people I didn't know. The living room turned into a constant hangout. Noise never stopped. Someone was always talking or moving around. I started noticing damage. A cable bent sharply where it had been pulled. My chair scratched. Small things, but not accidents. The kind of wear that happens when people don't care and treat your belongings like shared property. That's when I began documenting things. I took photos of the room when I went in to grab items. I wrote down dates when my door was left open or my things were moved. I kept receipts, not to argue every detail, but to be sure I wasn't imagining it. Renee stopped by again near the end of the week. She sat quietly in the living room, watching the noise and the lack of correction. Then she pulled me aside. She said this wasn't about space anymore. She said they were testing how much I'd tolerate. Once people get used to you giving in, they stop asking. The longer I stayed quiet, the worse it would get. That night, I sat Joyce down. I didn't raise my voice or accuse anyone. I explained it clearly. My work was suffering. I was paying rent for a room I couldn't use. I had offered solutions, and none were considered. Joyce sighed like I was draining her energy. She said I was making it harder than it needed to be, and that I should be more understanding. I told her I was done compromising. Either my room was returned to me, or I was moving out. I didn't threaten. I stated it plainly. Joyce didn't take it seriously. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She asked if I wanted coffee. She talked about errands and asked if I could bring in a package later. She didn't mention my room. When I said I was behind on work because I didn't have a space, she brushed it off and said things would calm down soon, like the issue was just noise and time. Zoe took it even less seriously. She laughed openly, like I'd told a joke. One day, she leaned on the counter and said I'd cool off once I saw what rent costs. She said places weren't cheap and that I'd be back within a month. She said I didn't realize how good I had it and was being dramatic over a room. I didn't respond. I stopped explaining. I stopped correcting her. I didn't need to win an argument. I needed a solution. So I started planning. I looked at listings during breaks and ran numbers late at night. I figured out what I actually needed and what I could cut. I wasn't looking for anything ideal. I needed a door, reliable internet, and quiet. A place where I could work and sleep without my space being treated as public. Within a week, I found something that worked. A small room in an older building. Clean enough, nothing fancy. The landlord was straightforward, didn't ask many questions, and didn't care that I worked from home as long as rent was paid. It cost more than what I paid Joyce, but it was manageable with discipline. I didn't tell anyone. I signed the lease, paid the deposit, got the keys, and put them in my glove box. I kept moving the same way I always did. Quiet, steady, no announcements. Then I started separating things. The internet was in my name, so I scheduled the transfer. A few subscriptions tied to the house moved with it. Not once did she say she could help. The tension didn't explode right away. It built slowly. Short arguments, sharper tones, doors closing harder than necessary. Zoe snapping at the kids. Joyce growing quiet, then irritated over small things. The house had a constant edge, like one wrong comment would set someone off. I stayed out of it. The night before I planned to move, I told Joyce. I waited until Zoe was busy and the house was quiet. No audience, no scene. I told her I found a place and was moving the next day. She froze for a moment. "Tomorrow?" she asked. I said yes. Her expression changed immediately. She started talking about timing and how sudden it was. She said she needed more notice and wasn't prepared. I told her I gave notice when I asked for my room back. That's when she went straight to money. She asked how she was supposed to cover bills. She asked if I was still paying rent next month and said I couldn't just cut them off. I told her she would have to figure it out. Zoe came in during the conversation, and Joyce told her I was moving out. Zoe laughed at first, like it wasn't real. Then she realized I wasn't bluffing. Her voice jumped. She called me selfish. She said I was abandoning family and doing this to punish them. She said I was trying to make her look bad and leave her stuck. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I told her the truth once. I told them clearly that I wasn't paying to be locked out of my own space. Zoe fired back immediately, saying I was ruining everything, throwing a tantrum, and leaving her without help. She started listing her problems like they were my responsibility. Joyce bounced between panic and anger. One moment, she said she never thought I'd actually leave. The next, she said I was overreacting and making a mistake. I didn't change my tone or apologize. I told Joyce my work equipment was already moved. I told her I'd be gone in the morning. I made it clear I wasn't negotiating. Zoe muttered something about me crawling back later. I ignored it. That night, the house stayed loud. Cabinets slammed. The kids were restless. Zoe paced around like she wanted the tension to stay high. Joyce stayed in her room. I packed the rest of my personal things quietly. Clothes, books, anything I didn't want lost or damaged. The heavy items stayed overnight. The desk, chair, remaining cables, and boxes would be moved in the morning. I wasn't dragging furniture out alone in the dark. When I finished, I locked the guest room door for the last time and lay down. For the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. No running in the hall, no arguments waiting downstairs, no pressure to explain myself again. They thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. I arrived early the next morning with Renee. No announcement, no warning text. I wanted it done quickly and cleanly. Renee stepped out of the car, looked at the house for a moment, and said, "Let's get your things and go." She wasn't there to argue. She was there to keep things controlled. As soon as we walked in, Zoe was already tense. She didn't say hello. She stared at us like we didn't belong. She asked Joyce what Renee was doing there, loud enough for everyone to hear. Renee smiled politely and said she was helping her nephew move. Zoe scoffed and said I wasn't moving and that this was ridicule. I didn't respond. I headed straight for the stairs. Zoe stepped in front of me and said I wasn't going upstairs because the kids were sleeping. I didn't raise my voice or slow down. I told her to move, calmly and directly. She crossed her arms and planted herself. Renee stepped beside me and told Zoe evenly that this wasn't her house. Zoe snapped at her to stay out of it and said it was family business. Renee didn't hesitate. She said that was exactly why she was involved. I walked past Zoe without touching her. She stumbled back slightly, more surprised than anything. That's when Joyce came out of the kitchen, already upset, demanding to know what was happening and why I was doing this that day. I reminded her I'd told her yesterday. I was moving. Her expression shifted quickly, from shock to anger. She accused me of tearing the family apart and asked if I understood what I was doing. I didn't stop moving. When I opened the door to what had been my room, the mess was worse than before. Toys everywhere, food wrappers on my desk, my chair jammed into a corner, items I didn't recognize stacked on shelves that used to be clear. I'd already removed the essentials, but they'd continued using the room like it belonged to them. It hadn't improved. It had deteriorated. Zoe rushed in behind me, saying I couldn't just walk in and that it was the kids' room. I told her it was my property and started unplugging what remained. She raised her voice, accusing me of abandoning my nieces and doing this to children. Renee stepped in immediately and told her to stop using the kids as a shield. She said this was about control. Zoe spun toward her, angry, telling her not to speak that way. Renee didn't back down and told her not to act like that. Then Joyce stood in the doorway crying again, saying she never thought I'd follow through and that she expected me to calm down. I didn't look at her. I kept packing. I took only what I paid for: the desk, chair, remaining equipment, and boxes of cables. Nothing extra, nothing petty, just my things. Zoe hovered nearby, commenting the entire time, calling me selfish and saying I thought money made me better than everyone else. She said I'd regret it. I ignored her. At one point, she tried to grab a box. Renee stepped between us immediately and told her not to touch it. Zoe threw her hands up and said it was unbelievable that I was really doing this. Joyce shouted that it was her house and that I couldn't just take things and leave. That was when I finally turned to her and said she shouldn't have taken my room while still taking my rent. That stopped her for a moment. The kids woke up during all of this. Leo stood in the hallway watching. Noah started crying. Zoe pointed at them like proof and said I was hurting them. I didn't respond. Renee knelt down and told the kids to go back to the living room. Joyce ushered them away, still crying and muttering about how unfair everything was. Once the room cleared, the tone changed. Joyce realized she wasn't stopping me. Zoe realized yelling wasn't working. They stood there silently while I carried boxes outside. No one helped. No one offered to make it easier. When the last box was loaded, Joyce followed me outside and said I couldn't just leave them like this because we were family. I closed the trunk and told her, family doesn't lock you out of your own space. Zoe shouted from the doorway that I shouldn't come back crying when this blew up in my face. I looked at her once and said I wouldn't. I got into the car. Renee sat beside me. No hugs, no speeches, just the engine starting. I didn't look back. At my new place, it was quiet, almost too quiet at first. We unloaded quickly. Renee helped carry everything up without commenting on the space. When the last box was inside, she told me I'd done the right thing. I nodded. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. No shouting, no footsteps, no tension. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Things started falling apart faster than I expected. I'd been gone less than a week when Joyce called. She didn't ask how I was or if I'd settled in. She asked about the internet. She said it was gone and asked if I canceled it. I told her it transferred with me because it was in my name. There was a pause. Then her tone sharpened. She told me to put it back because Zoe needed it for the kids. I told her I didn't live there anymore and she'd need to set it up herself. She hung up. 2 days later, utility bills started showing up. Joyce sent screenshots. Power, water, overdue notices. No explanation, just amounts and question marks. I replied once that I wasn't paying bills for a house I didn't live in. That set her off. She called yelling, saying I'd left her in a crisis, that I was irresponsible, and that I owed her extra for the rest of the month because I didn't give enough notice. I told her taking my room while taking my rent was the notice. She called me ungrateful and hung up. Zoe stayed quiet at first. Then she texted like nothing had happened. Friendly messages asking how my place was. No apology, no accountability. I didn't reply. Later that night, she texted again about money, saying Joyce was stressed and asking if I could help until things settled. I replied once and said she lived there, so she could help. Her tone changed immediately. She accused me of being cruel, punishing the kids, and trying to make her fail. I didn't respond. Without the internet, the house got louder. The kids couldn't stream anything. Zoe complained constantly. Joyce snapped back. Arguments happened openly instead of behind doors. Then Joyce made it public. She posted online about her son leaving during a hard time. She didn't name me, but it was obvious. Messages came in quickly, all asking the same thing. What really happened? I ignored it for a day. Then I stopped pretending silence was maturity. I didn't argue or explain at length. I posted only facts, proof of rent payments, the internet bill in my name, time-stamped photos of my room before and after. No insults, no speeches. The tone changed immediately. People stopped asking what happened and started questioning why Joyce left that out. The post disappeared the next day. Messages followed. I told the truth simply. I paid rent. I paid bills. My room was taken. I was locked out. I left. Most stopped responding. A few said they understood. After that, Zoe's situation worsened. Bills stacked up. Joyce pushed her to contribute. Zoe pushed back. They argued constantly. Joyce expected Zoe to step up the way I had. Zoe wasn't prepared to do that. The kids were moved back into the guest room, the exact solution I'd suggested earlier, because there was no other option. My old room stayed empty for a while. Joyce called again a few weeks later. She sounded tired, not angry. She said she didn't think I'd really leave. I reminded her I said I would. She said she thought I'd cool off. She said she thought family would matter more. I stayed quiet. She said things were harder now. I said I knew. She didn't apologize. She just said she wished I'd handled it differently. I told her I handled it the only way I could. After that, the messages slowed. Zoe stopped reaching out. I heard secondhand that things were tense and that she was looking for a place of her own. None of that surprised me. What did surprise me was how quiet my life became. My work picked up. I finished a delayed project and got paid. I set up my equipment exactly how I wanted. No one touched it. No one commented. Some nights I worked late because I could. The silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't replaying arguments or bracing for footsteps. They thought respect disappeared when I left. It didn't. It was never there to begin with. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel and allows us to bring you more stories like this.